Now to a war being waged in cyberspace. Social media giant Facebook unfriends, then refriends the nation of Australia over a spat that's redefining the relationship between big tech and big government. In a snap decision last week, Facebook blocked all Australian news providers after the government proposed legislation that would force the platform to pay for local news content. The move was met with outrage, especially since it also cut access to some emergency and fire services, as well as certain state health organizations. Now, both sides eventually came to an agreement, but who wins and who will have to compromise? Well, that's what I put to our panelist, Russell Skelton, director of the RMIT ABC Fact Check and senior lecturer in communications at Western Sydney University, Tanya Notley.
Facebook have agreed that they're now in a process of renegotiating with news media providers. I think users are the ones that are left really uncertain of how things will go. Facebook have said that they still retain the ability to, again, cut news if they are forced into agreements that they're not happy with. So, I think it's a little bit uncertain for users, and I think there's very mixed reactions in Australia to this. Some people are really happy that there's no news on Facebook anymore, but many others, of course, are being adversely affected. And we're yet to really understand the full impact of 1 week without news on Facebook.
Okay, Russell, was this all really necessary? I mean, did the model need to change?
Look, I just think it was all a bit of a negotiation, really. I don't think nothing has really changed all that much, and we don't know the details of the deal. I think it was a pretty heavy-handed exercise by Facebook to show who's boss, and I think it resonated pretty clearly with the government, because the government said they would not do any amendments to the legislation, and now they're prepared to consider amendments. So I'm not sure who's the winner or loser here.
Yeah, that is unclear. And Russell, I mean, I know you had concerns initially that this blockage could actually facilitate the spread of misinformation. Some were saying the spread of fake news, if you prefer that term. Do you still have those concerns?
Well, I do. It depends. I mean, I've been speaking to Facebook. I'm director of RMIT ABC Fact Check, and I've been talking to Facebook in Singapore, and they've assured me we're going to go back online, but we've been dark for a number of days now, and nobody can see our posts. It's not the end of the world for us, because we are broadcast on ABC platforms as well. But when we want to reach a diverse audience, particularly around when we're debunking false news, particularly around COVID, we don't have that diversity of audience anymore. We're very much limited to the ABC audience, which is considerable.
And now going forward, how difficult will this be to monitor the revenue streams, who's getting paid for what? When links are shared, for example, will there also be compensation? How will they monitor this process?
Well, unfortunately, in my opinion, what's happened is there's going to be deals done with individual news companies. We know that Google has made deals. We're told it's probably in around $150 million a year. The estimates we're hearing is that Facebook will be paying about $50 million a year to news media organizations, but none of that will be made public or transparent, and it won't be per click, or, it'll be a model of negotiating directly with news media organizations, and those who are the most influential and powerful are likely to get the most money. So what we don't have a guarantee of is that this estimated $200 million is going to go directly and fully into journalism and public interest journalism. It may go to these companies and it doesn't get filtered down sufficiently to journalism, because we've seen huge cuts in Australia, massive cuts over years. And so, there's no doubt that journalism is in a near crisis in Australia. And it'd be great if these funds can address this issue, and that we can see funds coming from Google and Facebook, who do obviously benefit from public interest journalism.
Certainly. Russell, do you share those concerns?
I do, and I think what's very troubling about all of this is now Facebook can bypass the government's code and just do a deal, say, with Newsland directly. We probably will never know how much money they're going to receive, or we may or may not. And there's a whole lot of more minor players here, regional newspapers and small outlets, and it's not clear whether they will even benefit at all from this. You know, if we look at our regional newspaper network, they're saying they're not entirely clear whether they'll even get $1 out of this. So it's a very uncertain situation. It's very unclear.
Right. Yeah. There are also freelancers as well in the picture that, you know, they live job to job. So if they have to pay, if Facebook and Google have to pay the content providers, that's, as Tanya was alluding to, that's not really going to trickle down to where it matters. But let me ask you as well, when we saw Facebook react the way it did, Russell, and respond so quickly by shutting it all down, could that potentially backfire on Facebook with people realizing that maybe they shouldn't allow their businesses to be so dependent on a free but privately owned platform?
Look, I think it did backfire here as a public relations exercise, but they've got what they wanted. So we had a few days without news appearing on Facebook, but they forced the government to the negotiating table. They've got the government to amend its legislation, which it said it would never do. The deals are going to be in secret. I would say Facebook's done pretty well out of this, and it's quite happy to wear the odium that goes with this sort of high-handed action they took. Where I took real issue with them was that Facebook were talking to us about joining their news fact-checking initiative. They were going to pay us to fact-check content, as they do with a whole lot of fact-checkers around the world. And they still shut us down. Even though they want our content, they still shut us down. So it's a pretty ruthless business here.
Tanya, one final issue for you to touch on. Are you expecting other governments around the world now to follow suit with this style of legislation? It's already started.
100%. Why wouldn't they? You know, a couple of $100 million to news media organisations. News media organisations are struggling around the world, so why wouldn't they?
Right. We have another minute. Russell, let me get your take on that. I see you had some comments.
No, I was just noting the fact that in Britain, they were sort of watching it very closely, but the official government spokesman said they weren't going to use what Australia did as a model to follow.
That they were not going to use that. I mean, this, again, we're back to where there's so much uncertainty as to how this could play out. Tanya, I'll finish with you. Give me kind of your worst case scenario. I hate to sound so cynical, but what could really go wrong with these models?
Look, to be honest, you know, the focus of my research is young people in news, and I get really concerned that in the end, Facebook decide it's not such a bad thing to cut news out of Facebook, and this follows suit in other social media platforms. And we know that, you know, although in Australia only 6% of people say that they only get their news from Facebook, adults say, we know that young people increasingly get news from social media. And I think that the way that we engage with news on social media, it's really important. We're hearing from our own personal networks that this story is important to them. We're getting other context around that news. And I think it would be really unfortunate and really sad if, you know, we see more of these kinds of actions, which in the end are restricting people's choice and people's freedom, and that's my main concern.
Russell, quick final words.
Well, I totally endorse those comments. I think the issue here is that trusted news won't, you know, in the worst case scenario, was not appearing on Facebook. So therefore, all the fake news, all the debunking, the malicious posts, all the rest of it thrived during this period. And that's a terrible negative, I think, and a terrible service that Facebook did Australia during that period.
Okay, indeed. Russell, Skelton, Tanya Notley, thank you so much for joining us on The Newsmakers. We appreciate having you.